Hi, everyone. Dom Famularo here. We are here for Mapex Live on the Mapex Facebook page. And I get the chance to sit down with these great, great artists. And today I am so freaking honored, man, to have the time. Please welcome Mr. Jeff Hamilton.
Hey, Dom, it's great to spend some time with you and catch up. And I hope you behave during this interview because I don't tolerate funny stuff. Okay.
Jeff, what's so amazing is I was able to hear you recently at the last Percussive Arts Society convention at PASIC. You were there with the band. I think Akiko was on
Hammond B3, yeah.
On Hammond B3, right? And
Graham Dexter was the guitarist.
Graham Dexter was on guitar, exactly right. The trio sounded fantastic. And what was amazing is the room was completely filled up, which had to be well over 1,500, close to 2,000 people. Everyone listened intently to every note everybody played. It was so exciting. And at the end, you brought this crowd to their feet, which was just astronomical to see in the world of jazz. So it was a phenomenal performance, and thanks so much.
Wow, thanks. We're done now, right? That's the interview. Let's quit while we're ahead.
So let me ask, now with all this downtime, I mean, you're out, you're not touring as nobody is at this particular point. What are you doing now to kind of make up for all this time?
I'm relying on the memories like the one you just shared with me, which that I loved being at that pacing, by the way. I hadn't been in a long time. And I agreed to do it because I wanted to play music at PASIC instead of just play drums, which a lot of it is, of course, you know, and other instruments. But I wanted to present a band. And do you remember one of the questions that was asked after we played this shuffle that, you know, if you don't feel like getting up and dancing after this shuffle, something's wrong. And the first question was, do you realize that your left foot is slightly askew off of your hi-hat pedal? You know, and I looked down at my foot and I picked up my leg, if you remember, and I set it squarely on the pedal. I said, "There, is that better?" You know, and the next question was, you know, when you just played, your right cymbal seemed like it was a little ahead of the beat, and your bass drum was a little behind the beat, and your snare drum was right on the beat. Are you doing that purposely? And I said, "How do you expect me to think about that when I'm worried about my left foot being on the hi-hat pedal?" You know. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. We were howling in the back of the room. I was with a handful of different people that we were howling in the back.
But that's, you know, that brings me. Go ahead. Sorry.
Here you are playing deep music, and unfortunately, the focus of some people gets too small, right?
Right. And I think we take ourselves too seriously sometimes. We need to be serious about the music that we play and getting better, of course. And, you know, fabulous teachers and clinicians like yourself, you see this all the time where players get a little bit too wound up in the actual concept of it instead of, you know, the first time I hit a drum, man, I had this big smile on my face. What happened? You know, now I'm worried about the concept and analyzing everything. I think we need to back off of that sometimes. So that brings me to my answer of your question is, during this downtime, I'm listening to nothing but great music and historic things that I need to check out that I haven't done before. I had elbow surgeries, one from tennis and one from golf in the mid-90s, and I did the same thing on the rehab then. I went back to Jimmy Lunsford's band and studied Jimmy Crawford and Fletcher Henderson's band, all those early bands, and really learned what, you know, where this music came from in the early 1900s, jazz I'm talking about. And and that's exactly what I'm doing now. I spent the weekend listening to Stan Levy, Shelly Manne, Larry Bunker, you know, from the 50s. And I mean, it's just I'm finding things, old Don Lemon things that I haven't seen. Of course, rediscovering all the great Jimmy Cobb sides that you hear when they first come out, you know, when you're a kid, and then you got to go back and rediscover those things again. So I think, you know, that's what I'm using my time for. And I'm not playing a whole lot. A lot of it is osmosis. I'll pull out a pad once in a while and run through some Wilcoxon type exercises, just improvising, but I'm not really playing a lot right now, which I think is good. I mean, I'm one of those people that's not so technique oriented that I can lay off for 3 weeks and pick up the sticks and kind of be where I was 3 weeks ago, except for up tempos. And then it takes a few nights to get those up tempos back, but it clears the cobwebs out mentally. And I feel like I can play anything I want to play, and I'm relaxed. And I mean, look at me, Dom, I'm relaxed. Okay.
What's interesting is talk about when you were younger. What got you involved with jazz, and what got you involved in being able to research? Listen, my first love has been and always will be jazz. There's such an excitement about playing it, and there's such an excitement about listening to the conversation of jazz. In the early days, what got you involved with it?
Well, first of all, I don't remember being younger, but I'll do my best. The first thing that got my attention, and we're the same age essentially by a few weeks, as we recently discovered. But I was 5 years old and laying on the floor like this in front of a black and white TV, watching Gene Krupa on TV, and I said, well, that's it. I got to be him.
Yeah.
And so that's what got me into it. And it's interesting to me later on, I realized that it wasn't so much the bum bubba do ba do ba da ba do sing stuff that was going on. It was his sound. It was the Radio Kings with the calfskin heads, that big round warm sound. And that's what got to me. It wasn't anything else. Plus, I mean, he looked really hip too. I mean, slick back hair and the white shirt, crisp shirt, and black thin tie and a black suit. I mean, he looks so hip. It's like, oh, I got to do that, So that's what caught my eye and ear. But what I think fortified that was the fact that I made a fifth grade band when I was way too young to make it, a summer band. So they said, he's got some talent. We need to put him with a rudimental snare drum teacher. And bless his heart, man, 5 years of snare drumming, which doesn't happen nowadays. It's like you learn the snare drum for 5 days. He even had Frank Arsenault come by and give a clinic and made me play for him at 12 years old, and I'm like, come on, man, and so that training of 5 years of snare drum was easy to transfer to the drum set with what Gene was doing. Yeah. Buddy Rich, Louis Belson, Ed Shaughnessy. Yeah. People don't talk about Ed Shaughnessy in that realm. Yeah. One of the hottest studio players in New York with O.C. Johnson and Don Lemond. They each had drum sets spread around the studios, and they'd see who was in the next day and set the cymbal stands up for O.C. or Don the next day. Yeah. So, I mean, that rudimental kind of drumming really transferred for me, and I could apply it to the drums. So that lent itself to big band jazz. And then I started listening to the Basie Band with Papa Joe Jones. Yeah. And then, some friends of mine in the neighborhood turned me on to Oscar Peterson Trio. My mother was a church organist and pianist, and we had some big band records in the house. And so they liked hearing that music. My folks liked hearing the old big bands and the records we had. So that's the music I grew up on. I was never really a product of my generation. Because at that time, the drumming was so sophisticated from what I was listening to at 5 years old to what happened later when the Beatles came on Ed Sullivan when I was 12. And I have to, a lot of people, I'm going to get some hate mail for this, but it didn't do it for me because I was already playing stuff that Papa Joe and Buddy and Gene and these guys were playing. And that drumming didn't interest me at the time. It seemed too simple and I didn't get what it was about. There wasn't enough drumming to capture my attention. And so I just was really stuck in the big band and the piano trio world for the rest of my life,
Well, you mentioned these great people like Ed Shaughnessy. There's a book that Ed wrote that I have that's a phenomenal book. I just received a book just a couple of days ago on Stan Levy, which I'm looking forward to getting into. So, I mean, all these, there's information out there.
There is.
And listen, Jimmy Cobb, God rest his soul. We just lost him. And I was able to have an interview with him, on the Sessions panel. And just what a dear soul. And he played right to the end.
He was incredible. We were on the jazz cruise together last year. And it was 2 years ago. And every time he played, you had every drummer on the ship. There were about 25 drummers, and we all were. I mean, it's not a cruise. It's the jazz cruise. There are 2,500 passengers. They're all jazz fans. And nothing but jazz musicians. And there are 4 stages going all the time. So Carl Allen, Lewis Nash, Kenny Walsh. I mean, we're all John Riley, Dennis McCrell. We're all Joe LaBarbera. We're right at Jimmy Cobb's left hip the whole time watching him. And it was a masterclass every time. And I transcribed Jimmy in the in the early 70s. I had just joined Monty Alexander Trio, and there's a lot of traveling time. So I started transcribing a lot of his things. And this is interesting to some of the drummers, maybe, because Philly Joe Jones would play sextuplets, triplets, right, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, right, left, left, you know, and he could burn through these things a la Will Coxon, you know. And so I saw Jimmy play for the first time much, much later. I was 30 something the first time I saw Jimmy play. Our paths never crossed. And he finished his set with Cobb's Mob, and he stood at the top of the steps. And I said, I'm at the bottom of the steps. I said, Mr. Cobb, my name is Jeff Hamilton, and you're a big hero of mine. I used to transcribe you. And he said, don't Mr. Cobb me. I know who you are. And I said, oh, well, thank you very much. And I said, well, now that we have that out of the way, this is the first time I've ever seen you play. And I sat up in the balcony so I could look down at all your limbs. Yeah. And I thought, you know, after transcribing you, I thought you'd like to know that you're using the wrong sticking on everything you're playing. And he broke up and he gave me a big hug. And he says, come on, let's go get some coffee and hang out on the break. And we spent the whole break together. And we were friends ever since after that. But I knew he could take that, you know, because Jimmy single stroked a lot of things. You know, it was mostly single strokes. So that's where the joke is for those who didn't understand that and think that I'm a complete jerk for disrespecting Jimmy Cobb. You know?
But I think what's amazing, you have done some incredible research, and I wish a lot of the people that are logging on here, we got so many different people that are kind of logging on right now and checking it out. All these players, I had a chance to have a couple of lessons with Papa Joe Jones. I mean, Philly Joe Jones, whenever we'd go backstage to see Philly Joe Jones, he'd pull out the Will Coxon book, like you said, and we would do rudimental stuff together. I mean, these guys were studied and they were into it big time.
Yeah. And they also appreciated us doing that because we didn't sit down with a pair of sticks and try to carve them. You know, I mean, we wanted to learn from them. And you're talking about Philly Joe Jones. That was his man. Will Coxon was his man. And any transcription of Philly Joe you do, you somewhere in the Will Coxon book, you're going to find that. And I don't mean to put that down. Some people take that wrong. That's where his ideas, the concept came from, like 7-stroke. He showed me when I took the lesson with him in 75 that you break it up. The parody, if you get 2 rights, put them in the bass drum. You know, or the 2 middle strokes, put that on the rim, you know, a rim tap, a stick click, you know, or whatever they're calling it now. Rim shot is what we used to call it with the stick. Or drop it and just move it around a little bit in your 5-stroke roll on the bass drum. Play the middle 2 strokes on your bass drum, you know. So all that, it's all directly related to and he was proud of it. I mean, he wanted to talk about it. You know, so you're absolutely right.
Absolutely. And I remember clearly, we'd go backstage, I'd go back to see him, and he'd give me a pair of sticks, and on the same pad, he'd open up Will Coxon, and we'd be reading it. I would be making mistakes all over the place, and he would cut through that stuff like a warm knife through warm butter. It was beautiful how smooth and he made that rudimental sound so musical.
Right. The first time he asked me he said, you know this book? And I said, yeah, I went through it when I was 12. And he said, play it for me. And he didn't have any drums in his place, you know, he had a red vinyl bar stool. And so I picked up the sticks. I played one of the exercises like the way I'd learned it. You know, he goes, no, like this. And I went, okay, the light bulb's going off now, you know. So it was quite a reality at that moment for me to climb into with him, and it seems like it's still real today. You know, it's just like it just happened yesterday, is what it feels like.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. We'll talk about in the early 70s. So you're taking some lessons, and you joined up with Monty Alexander, right? Was that your first band?
Well, there was a lot before that. I started a little younger. I started by the early 70s. You mean the 1970s, right? The first job I got was on the new Tommy Dorsey band. It was a ghost band that Murray McEachran, the great trombonist, led, and John Clayton had played with Murray in the summer at Palm Springs, and they needed a bunch of college kids that would come out for $225 a week. I got $250 because I was a drummer, and go out and play 50 weeks a year and play that original Tommy Dorsey book. So I went out at 20 years old on the road. And I loved it. I learned how to treat a big band instead of just I turned it down. And my teacher, John Von Olin, I took a lesson with. I studied with John for 8 months. And I dropped out of Indiana University to study with him because I thought, this is what I want to learn. I don't want to be a timpanist, you know. I want to play jazz. I want to play big band drumming. So I went to Von Olin, and he turned me around from a Buddy Rich wannabe to a looser swinging Mel Lewis more influenced type player. So I put those two things together, which helped me on the big band. You know, I wasn't killing everybody with a lot of rudiments and everything. I was giving them what they needed, offering some time to them, and I made sure the dance floor was full on every tune. The first night, Murray McEachran tapped on the bass drum after the first tune, and I'm like Elvining out on Opus 1, you know. And he said, "Just play pretty for the people." And I went, okay, went to the hi-hat and do bop, and stay, and that dance floor was full. He came, he says, "We don't have the dance floor full, we don't work."
Interesting.
So that was a huge lesson for me. And then Lionel Hampton hired me off of that band as things happen, you know, word of mouth. Yeah. And then John Clayton called me and said, Monty Alexander asked me to join him and needs a drummer that I'm comfortable with. Would you want to do that? I said, of course. So I got off of the band. So that was June of 75 that we joined Monty Alexander. And again, 50 weeks a year, because there were location jobs then. We played Rush Street, the back room, for a month. You never hear that anymore. We played the Century Plaza Hotel Hong Kong bar for 2 solid weeks. You know, everything's a one-nighter now.
Yeah.
But then it was location work, so you could stay on the road for. I didn't have a place to live for 7 years. I mean, I was on the road and kept boxes in my parents' house. So yeah, Monty Alexander 2 years, and then I always wanted to go on Woody Herman's band because of the legacy that was left by great Dave Tuff and Don Lamont, who became a friend, I'm proud to say, and Jake Hanna, one of my dear all-time friends and all-time characters, and then Ed Soph, who I think revolutionized big band drumming. When he went on Woody Herman's band, and I wanted a shot at that book, so I actually called my friend Birch Johnson up, the trombonist who is in the Saturday Night Live band, and he was playing lead for Woody, and I said, I'd love to come on the band next time there's an opening, let me know. And Danny D'Imperio was going to get off the band, so I went on that band of July of 77 then, and was going to stay for a year. They wanted guys to stay for a year. So I said, yeah, I'll stay for a year. Well, 6 months later, Ray Brown hired me to join the LA Ford and move to Los Angeles because Shelly Manne was leaving the group. And it was well, I said, Woody, I owe you 6 months worth, so call me anytime. And he took my word at it. He called me every time there was a drummer issue. They had 13 drummers in 14 nights one time. And he called me and said, get back out here for a month. I need you. So So that took us up to like 78. And then the LA Four stayed together to 80 till 83.
Well, talk about Woody's band, because in Woody's band, and you mentioned all these names, and I want everyone to really understand who these people are. Russ Miller joined us here. Russ, thank you so much for joining us. Russ Miller, I had the chance of interviewing him several times, and Russ gets it. Russ knows all these names. He knows who these people are. Fill it a little bit in, Jeff, in the past, to give this listening crew the importance of, they should know who Don Lamont was. What a wonderful person he was too, aside from being a great swing player.
That's true. Russ is so hip, he even knows who I am. So Don Lamont followed Dave Tuff in the late 40s, the Four Brothers band after the first Herd, Woody Herman and the Thundering Herd. And Dave Tuff was a big influence on so many drummers, and no one talks about him enough either. Shelly Manne talked about him all the time. He kept bringing up Davey's name because he wasn't really a soloist at the time. He was so happy just keeping the band swinging. And Flip Phillips, the tenor player in the band, told me one night that they were playing, and Flip just kept getting hot on Apple Honey, and he turned around and Davey had tears running down his face. And I mean, this is an up-tempo swinging thing, And Flip took the horn out of his eye and says, "What the hell's the matter with you?" And Davey said, "It'll never get any better than this."
Wow.
It was that the band was that heavy, and so Davey was a sweetheart. Died way too early. Don Lamont came on right after him. And Don was such a great drummer and musician, I should say first, because Woody started the Second Herd with Don Lamont and chose the band around Don Lamont. And anytime you start a band with a drummer, the drummer's got to have something to say, So that was a really historic time for that. And then that band was fantastic. Jake Hanna came, many other, Chuck Flores,
Yeah,
Sonny Igo that nobody talks about, Tommy
yeah,
Igo's father, nobody talks about Sonny, Chuck Flores, Ronnie Zito. There's so many great drummers from that era, and then Jake Hanna put his stamp on the band, 63 and 64. With Woody's band, and that was an incredible band. Bill Chase and Nat Pierce and Sal Nistico on tenor, and
yeah.
each one of those periods of Woody's band was just a historic time for that band. They made their own mark, and they all sounded different because the drummer made the band sound different. Every time I'd go on Woody's band, I could tell you what kind of drummer was on when I would come on, because it would take a couple of nights for the band to get used to what I was doing. So the drummer changes the band. Woody turned around on my first night and he said, "Don't forget, this is your band, pal." Meaning, you chose this instrument and you can orchestrate and shape the band dynamically, fill wise, hand them what they need. And I went right into what Mel Lewis told me, which was be confident and don't make them play, but be confident about your beat. And you got to be comfortable with your beat. And so you got to sing your ride cymbal beat and know your beat, and then you can offer it to the band and offer them to come into that instead of make them come in by rim shots and cymbal crashes and cross sticking and getting mad and glaring, and which I've done my share of. If it pays enough money, I'll do that. But I think knowing your beat and offering it to the band is what really got me through that period with Woody, and he understood that, and he appreciated that I wasn't trying to beat the band up. I was just trying to play the music, serve the music always, and honor what came before me.
Boy, when you think of that, I mean, that's such a heavy philosophy. To serve the music, at that moment. It's all about the music, and then to honor those before you. I had some lessons with the great Shelly Manne, and Shelly used to brag about him playing the part of Davy Tuff in the Gene Krupa movie.
Right.
These guys were so aware of each other, of what was happening. Beautiful, beautiful stories.
Yeah, I think some of that's missing now, Dom. I don't know if you run into this, but there's a generation that's a couple of generations, one or two generations after me, that Matt Wilson pointed this out. He said, "Listen, when you have a teacher, that teacher remains your teacher for the rest of your life."
Yeah.
You don't just discard the 2 or 3 lessons that you got. I mean, something's going to come out from those lessons every night you play. And I think, we used to have these drummer lunches with Ed Shaughnessy and Frank Capp, and Joe LaBarber would be in, Jake Hanna. And we all discussed this, that, Louis Bellson never stopped talking about Gene. He said the nicest guy in the business, and Jake was talking about Davy Tuff and Joe Jones, and I mean, you're just sitting there, and it's a history lesson, listening to these people, honoring the people that came before them, and otherwise, where would they be? You don't just come out of the womb and saying, "Man, I'm a hipster and I'm going to play." I mean, it's like, you got to honor the cats that showed you some stuff before, I think.
Boy, Jeff, I mean, maybe what you're saying, and this might be another step for you at this time right now, it might be time for you to start to make note of this and start putting a book together that allows these kinds of stories that you live through, and the responsibility of being able to sit down with someone like Philly Joe and Papa Joe and these people that were just incredibly, and before you, and listen, even playing with Oscar Peterson, sitting into the chair before Ed Thigpen. I mean, that's incredible what Ed did.
Yes. Mr. Thigpen, thank you for that suggestion. I'll consider that. I'm a very busy man, though. The honor of meeting Ed Thigpen was in '78, and it was with the LA4, and we played Copenhagen. At that time, he'd already moved to Copenhagen, and he came to see Ray and wanted to hear what this kid was about at 24 years old. And from the minute we met, we were instant friends. And every time we were together after that, we had a pair of brushes in our hands, and we'd sit down, and we did things a lot differently with the brushes. He's one of my huge brush heroes, and yet our concepts are different. And boy, you can identify a Thigpen in a minute. There's one instance where, I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying absolutely. You could hear his style.
Okay. Sorry. There was a little delay here. Sorry. So there was a jazz party where they wanted the 4 drummers to do something. was Alan Dawson, Ed Thigpen, Billy Higgins, and me. And so Alan went first, and the rest of us are looking at each other like, well, what are we going to do after this? And because his concept is everything you play with sticks, you should play with brushes. Be able to do that. And then Ed played, and he was smoothing it out, and he got all pretty with this side to side stuff. And Billy and I are looking at each other like, what are we going to do? Billy starts with a slow blues, da 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 da, and just plays the brushes and slow, and the place came apart. Now, what am I going to do? So I start playing, and I do my forward motion and my backward motion, and I leaned up and I got my necktie caught in the brushes, and I rolled it all the way up to my neck, and I got caught, and that was the end of the piece. We had to stop the piece, But by being identifiable with your brush sound, I think is something that we can all kind of look at, because that, to me, I think you can get more of your personality out through the brushes than sticks. That's my own personal thought on it. And I think people that haven't found it haven't spent enough time with the brushes, because you've got instant long notes, you got legato, you got short, you got smooth, all these different textures that we don't get with sticks. So I think brushes really can expose who you are, and maybe people are kind of afraid to do that. So, I know I am.
Well, it is a skill that takes time to work on, and you've done some great things with Steve Smith and Adam Nussbaum and some really currently great brush players. Really, some classic stuff has been performed.
Yeah, we kind of gravitate toward each other. It's Ulysses has been in touch recently, and he's got a lot of things out right now, and he's putting a lot of brush videos out. And I think the more time you spend with them, you're either going to really love it or you're going to hate it and forget it and just put them down. But if you have a passion for that, then you're going to spend some more time with those things and find out what there is to explore. And the best way to do that is sit down with somebody else, like you did with Philly Joe, and watch what they do next to you. Ed Thigpen went counterclockwise a lot with the left hand. I go clockwise. But I still heard musically what he was doing, and I'm listening to that. It's like, oh, I wouldn't think of that. Does that work clockwise now? And I'd see if it did, and try to borrow that from Mr. Thigpen, So, but we'd exchange ideas, because there were things learning from Von Olin that I did a lot differently. So he'd ask me what that was. Now you go that way on this, and you tap it. So it wasn't. I'm not trying to say Ed Thigpen studied with him. I'm just saying that everybody's got their own personal sound with the brushes, and we're all trying to check each other out all the time.
Boy, it's so beautiful. Here's a question. I want to bring up a question from Phil Hendrickson. Can you talk about how young players need to listen to the whole band and not just the drummer or what the drummer is doing to absorb the feel of the music? Listen to the bigger picture. Jeff, just talk about that for a second.
Yeah. Well, first of all, if the drummer's doing his job, it's not hard to listen to the band, because he's handing them everything. Like I was mentioning before, John Von Olin told me that you have to be so aware in a big band. You got to know what everything is doing, what every part's doing. You have to be aware of the baritone sax player, which usually is at the other end of the band, the third trombone player. You have to know how the band is breathing. A lot of times, if I'm playing with a lead trumpet player that I haven't played with, I've got them out of the corner of my eye, and I can tell how they breathe, how they're going to attack their entrance. And the same thing in Oscar Peterson's trio. The setup was I could see the keyboard. The same thing in my trio. We have the same trio. Bass is right next to the hi-hat, and we're all 6 feet from each other, which incidentally works nowadays. And I could see the keyboard, both with Monty Alexander, with Gene Harris and Ray Brown trio, with Oscar Peterson. You see, so if their hands are coming up this high, you're not going to play pianissimo on the downbeat. So all these things, just for an example, if you're aware of all that going on, then you can apply what you need to apply to make the music sound as good as it possibly can. So the awareness of everything going on in the band is crucial when you're playing drums. And how do you get that? You do it by listening, as Mr. Henderson just suggested. When you're listening to the recordings, listen to every day. Just focus on the bass trombone player through one listen through. Just listen to that. And then you'll discover, well, he wasn't playing with the lead trombone player. What could I have done to help that out? And then you start thinking those kind of things. That it's like, well, if I was in the band, maybe I'd try this and see if it worked. So dynamic
Interesting.
wise, it really bothers me to hear a drummer not pay attention to the rest of the band dynamics. They're just playing
Yeah.
drums in a big band. And the question that I know you hear all the time too in your teachings is, do you like to play small group better or big band better? Well, there's not one
Yeah.
style of big band drumming. You got Bill Holman's band, you got Toshiko
Yeah.
Akiyoshi, you have Maria Schneider, you got Count Basie. You can't play the same way in all those bands, and you can't play the same way in Art Blakey's small group as you would with Bill Evans and Stan Getz. Or, I mean, you got to serve the music, figure out what's going on by all the homework and listening you've done. And then when you get the opportunity to play in that band, you know what to do based on your listening because you've done a lot of homework.
Boy, that is so, so important. Talk about when you're playing small group of big band, and then you've got a vocalist to support also.
Well, first of all, I took that verb out of my vocabulary musically. When I'm on the bandstand, I don't feel like I'm supporting anyone. I'm playing music with them, and I know it's a small thing, but I think it can get in here about, oh, I need to support the singer. And I'll tell you a great example of that. And this may have been when I took support out of my vocabulary, is my first night with Ella Fitzgerald. Now, I've got all the respect in the world for Miss Fitzgerald. It's the mid 80s, and she's getting a little older, and I'm thinking, I need to maybe cool it a little bit, So I go on the gig, and great Keeter Betts is on bass, Paul Smith's on piano. And the first tune, I'm kind of tipping, vocalist gig, piano trio behind a vocalist, So I'm tipping, she turns around after the first tune, and she was a sweetheart. She turns around and she says, "Go ahead and give it to me, honey." And I said, okay, and I went right to those recordings of Gus Johnson with Ella Fitzgerald playing like he's in the Basie band. And I started having at it, and I could barely hear Paul and Keeter on the next tune. I heard her, and she turned around and winked at me after the tune. And it's like, I don't need to support her. I need to get in there and play music with her, So that's the approach that I wanted to explain. That I'm not putting down anybody using the word support, but psychologically it does make a difference to me. It's like, do I want to be the doormat that the band walks on to get into the house, or do I want to be in the band that goes in the house with them? So I just want to play music with people, and I'm piano trio wise, which is another reason I got my own trio. There's so many trios where the piano player is the focus and the bass player and the drummer are sweeping the floor behind the piano player, and they don't have a say in the music, and they're just going ding ding a ding ding a ding ding a ding, and that's why I heard something different in a piano trio setting, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to have my own trio.
Boy, talk about your trio, because the album that you have out now, which is "Catch Me If You Can," just talk about putting that all together, and then you being the leader, and now you're really kind of putting this whole thing together on your own.
Yeah, it started in '94. I was winding up my tenure with Ray Brown Trio with Benny Green at that time had joined the band, and I actually was going to leave the trio 2 years before when Gene Harris was leaving the band. Actually, before Gene left the band, I had given my notice, and Benny Green came in, and we did the first time I played with him was on a record date with James Morrison. We were going to tour Australia, and we needed a record to promote the tour. So we did one tune, and Ray leaned over the baffle and he says, "So Hammer, what do you think?" I said, "I'd like to withdraw my resignation," and I stayed for 2 more years because Benny Green had come in the band, and we had such a great couple of years, and I love playing with Gene Harris too. I was just kind of ready to get my own trio started, but that prolonged it until '94 when I started my trio then. The current pianist is Tamir Hindelman. He's been in the trio 21 years. We're in our 21st year. Christoph Ludi was in the trio 20 years. The new bassist is John Hamer, and it's his first record with the trio. And he I asked him to bring a couple of things in, and I want 3 equal working parts in the trio. I don't want anybody to be hidden at any time. And we're ever present. Everything's up in the mix all the time, and you're never scuffling to hear anybody in the band. But also musically, we're all active all the time without crashing into each other and colliding and competing and vying for solo space. I mean, there's enough. You only got 3 people, so you're going to have enough blowing room on
Yeah,
all the
yeah.
recordings. So yeah, I'm really happy with this new recording. Yeah.
Talk about what it's like when you're working with musicians, like you said, 20, 21 years. And I know what it's like with friends of mine that I've known for years. When we sit down to play, there's just something that is so comfortable that you can literally read each other's minds.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the hair standing up on the back of my neck as you say that, Dom, because we're not getting to experience that right now, and we're so used to that.
Yeah, yeah.
The recent experience was on the jazz cruise in January, which I've done, I think, 20 times or so of the current one. I did the earlier ones too on the Norway and Holland America, and it's just this love fest of jazz folks, for that whole time, and I think the last time that I had that experience with people I don't always play with. First of all, I always get it when I play with Joey DeFrancesco. We just have this common link it's just magical. And what little I've played with Christian McBride, even though I've known him since he was like 17 or 18, we don't get to play that much. When we do, it's all ballads in a studio, So we were put together, the 3 of us were put together on the jazz cruise. And I think it was after the second chorus, we all had big grins on our face, and Christian turns to me and he just says, "Old pair of shoes." It's just like stepping into an old pair of shoes. It's so comfortable that you don't have to think about anything. You're not worried about anything. You're just doing what you love to do with people that love to do it with you. And it's such a fantastic experience. And it's hard to talk about. It's hard to describe unless you've had that experience with other musicians where you're like minds. And it all comes together, and you feel like you're playing each other's instruments, actually, at some point.
It's really, really powerful. We have different people here, Jeff, from Chile, from South America, from the Ukraine. We've got people from all over the place here. I got a question here from Carlos Gutzman. Carlos is a phenomenal drummer in the Miami area, and Carlos he played with the Letterman many years ago. Really, really good jazz big band drummer. He said, after studying so many different types of music and drum techniques, do you remember your first aha moment when you realized that it was all starting to come together? Was there any one specific moment you can think of?
Yeah, there are a couple, actually. Carlos, thanks for joining us. I think, first of all, when I started to develop the rudimental looseness from the Frank Arsenault school through my drum teacher of letting the sticks do the work, and you didn't have to work that hard. Let the stick bounce, And that was the first aha moment that this isn't what I thought it was going to be at all. And the second one was when I went in for my first lesson with John Von Olen, who played trombone until he was, in high school. And he saw Mel Lewis on the Stan Kenton band. And he said, I left that concert as a drummer. He put down the trombone and started playing drums. So he just did what he thought he should do, which is throw the stick at the cymbal and get a big sound and a big beat. And he was a drummer. He didn't go through the whole rudimental thing like a lot of drummers have. So when I did my first lesson with him, I couldn't figure out what he was doing. I loved the way he played, but I couldn't figure out what he was doing. Just it was like he had a fish by the tail, just throwing it at the cymbal. And so he said, "Well, play for me." And I said, "Okay." So I sat down and I did my best Buddy Rich impression, and ended with "What make your big head so hard?" Bang, and and he's standing there with his arms full, and he goes, "Well, that was impressive. I don't know what the hell it was, but that was impressive." And I'm thinking, oh, I guess I'm over his head, And he says, "So what do you want from me?" And I said, "Well, I like your ride cymbal sound. I like your ride cymbal beat. I like your big band fills, setups. I like your trading." And it ended up naming everything that he did that I liked. And he said, "Okay, well then get up." And I got up off of the throne, and he sat down, all arms and legs, and he leaned down on his left leg like this, and he picked up the right stick and he threw it at the cymbal and got 3 bounce, and it was dag-a-day, 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 and my knees actually buckled. I remember grabbing the wall behind me because I'd never heard a cymbal sound that wide open, and I'd never seen a grip that loose, and I didn't know how it was happening. And that was the moment. but that it turned me from being a wannabe Buddy Rich second player, Buddy Rich the second, into being my own player, because that concept was the key to open up the door for me to get my own cymbal sound, which he allowed and encouraged. It wasn't like you have to hold the stick like this and you got to do it like this. He said, no, this is just a concept that opened the door for you to find your sound. So that was, Carlos, that was really the big. And then when you apply it with a band and you find out it works, it's like, well, okay, this is it. So that's the biggest aha moment, probably.
Well, it's so amazing when you think about the stories of all these great players, that we really do stand on the shoulders of these great players that came before us. They really are.
If we're smart enough, we do.
Point well taken. If we're smart enough, that's why I think there's a book inside you that has to have these stories delivered, so we don't lose these stories. You know, when you
Dom, I'm just making all this up, but it's good, isn't it?
You mentioned someone like Ed Shaughnessy, and another just great player at so many different levels. And just, you know, he was a constant student. And I think that's something which I'm always impressed by, all the names that you've mentioned and yourself also. There's that ability of being that constant student.
That's true. You know, I think today, this week, the eternal student is Steve Smith. You know, Steve has done so much homework on everybody. The first time we sat down, you know, we were asking each other questions, and we were across each other in '78, I think, and a snare drum, talking to each other about, well, what do you do? What do you do? And he's, you know, finding Sandy Nelson. Going through all this history of finding what these people are about, and then can sit down and do it. And then the hi-hat, you know, the compliment Max Roach paid him after he saw him do the hi-hat, Mr. Hi-hat. I mean, Steve is a great example of being the eternal student. You know, he's just, I recommend highly to talk to him about what he's done, to check out what you need to learn at your instrument for the genres of music that you're playing.
But I think that importance of going back to kind of grab these stories, going back to do the research, you know, someone like Mel Lewis, who had such a very unique style and sound. And I used to go every Monday night to the Thad Jones Mel Lewis Big Band at the Village Vanguard and just sit there in awe of his use of space and time and uniqueness of how he played. And we just don't have that information available right now for everyone.
That's true. However, it is more available through this platform that we're on now. You know, you and I were dropping needles on LPs at the same place to try to get Philly Joe Jones 4s transcribed, you know, and now you push a button and it's all right there at the end of your fingertip. But you don't experience everything. You don't experience the vibrations in your body from the sound of sitting at the Vanguard going, why is the band so hot and they're only playing forte? It's not fortissimo, and Mel's playing like mezzo forte, and the roof is coming off the place. I want to know how to do that, you know, and it's hard to get that unless you're sitting there with the band live, you know, and experiencing that. So it's very true, you know. So a lot of ways you'll get something, you'll get more things because they're more available to you, and you can find out more about the people that came before us. A lot of the recordings were gone by the time I came up, that they weren't reissued until the CDs came out, and then they started reissuing some of the 30s and, you know, some of those things again, so you could find them again. So there's a gap in my listening. A lot of the early Blue Note things I had to go back and really start listening to again. Blue Note label.
Boy, how amazing. You know, you talked about in the early days with Gene Krupa that his sound was such an important part of that aura that he created.
Yeah.
Your sound, when I heard you at Pasek, your sound was the same thing. Your sound was encompassing and it was welcoming. You know, your sound was welcoming. You played and the audience felt that they were closer to your sound. So talk about that, your sound, and even the drums that you have, how you tune and how you bring all that together.
Yeah, we touched on that. Thank you, Dom. That sort of validates my statement before about offering the music to you, you know, and you happen to welcome it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what you want other musicians to do while you're playing with them. You want to welcome their sound, and you want them to welcome what you're doing, your beat and your sound. And Gene's big round sound, and I'm not talking about low, I'm talking about round sound. He got all of the drum.
Yeah.
Every time he hit a drum, I mean, you know, some of these drum sets nowadays are so expensive. If you spend enough money on it, you might as well get your money's worth and play the whole thing. You know, a lot of people just get a top head sound and everything is upstroke and upbeat, and they don't, you know, I was taught to throw the stick through the drum. Think of letting the stick drop through the drum to the bottom head, and the bass drum's the same way. Throw the beater through to the front head. Don't jam it against the head.
Yeah.
And so that gives you that big warm sound. Then I meet Mel Lewis, and all he does is talk about being 11 and 12 years old. And when Gene would come through Buffalo, he'd call Mel up and say, "You better be sitting by the floor tom tonight." You know, so that's where Mel's sound kind of came from. And Tiny Khan, a lot of people don't know who Tiny Khan is. He died in his mid 30s, and he grew up with Terry Gibbs and Johnny Mandel, and they played stickball together, you know, but he was a great drummer and an arranger. And you know, Mel never admitted this to me, and I think he has to some other folks, but his sound, I think, came from Tiny Khan combination and Gene Krupa.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started tapping into where my sound really was. And because I've never played high pitched drums, I want the drums to blend with the band. And the same thing with cymbals. You know, you hear people say, "Boy, I want a ride cymbal that cuts through the band." I don't want to cut through the band. I want to play music with the band. You know, I want my cymbal sound to embrace the band, and I don't want a sharp sounding snare drum that's going to carve the band up with a rim shot. I had a lead trumpet player in a college band in Richmond, Indiana, Earlham College. It was Quaker College. I guess they didn't have any Quaker jazz drummers, so they came over to the high school, and they got me at 15 years old, and I was playing in a college band at 15 years old. The best thing and worst thing that could happen, Buddy Rich charts. So it's like I had my own band at 15, and you know, exactly what I didn't need. So at the end of the first rehearsal, the 22-year-old lead trumpet player comes over and he says, "Hey kid, you sound really good, but do you know how many rim shots you're hitting?" I said, "No." He said, "Every time you want to bring us in or set us up, you're hitting a rim shot. You know what that feels like?" I said, "No." He said, "It feels like you're screaming at me. I just want to play music with you."
Interesting.
And that was it. I stopped playing rim shots from that day on. To this day, I very rarely hit a rim shot, you know. And so the sound of what you're playing is the most important thing. That's the first thing I listen to on any musician, on any instrument. And so that sound has gone through. If you look at any recording I've been on, I can honestly say that there's not one recording where I'm not crazy about my sound. No matter who the engineer was, it might be mixed low, but at least it's my sound. And if you're looking for me on drums, you're going to be able to tell that's me. And so that's just become my sound. So that's why I was thrilled when Russ Miller and Bob Terry, artist relations at Mapex, 2 years ago called me, 3 years maybe now, said, "You know, we have a drum set we'd like you to try. It's your sound."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, I'm with Remo." I says, "No, Remo's not going to make drums anymore." And I said, "What? Why am I the last person to know?" You know. And so they asked, and I cleared all that up with Remo. They said, "Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to try these drums." Brock Carrick was just, you know, perfect, and because I've been with them a long time, and was in on the development of the fiber skinheads with Louis Belson and Ed Thigpen and Billy Higgins. So long relationship with Remo, which I still am so happy to be involved with them. They've been wonderful all these years. Well, Russ and Bob call me and said, "We got to get this drum set to you because we've got a drum set that is your sound that Russ had a lot to do with designing." And okay, I'll give him full credit. He had everything to do with designing the drum set. Absolutely. And you know, and over the years, people have sent me drum sets and said, "Can you let us know what you think?" And I send them back and say, "Yeah, it's good drum set. It's not what I would play, but it's well constructed and you're on the right." Well, these drums were like, uh-oh. Now this got my attention, and so I walked away from it. I didn't play them the rest of the day. I came back. Played them again, same thing. So Carlos, that would be my third aha moment. You know? So I set 4 other drum sets of other brands up and played them, and I had 4 people come up, 2 who are not musicians, and I just said, "What do you think?" And I even involved my wife in it, who has great ears, you know, and they all pointed to the Mapex, the BPDL design that was sent to me, and I said, I know, I couldn't believe it, but that's it. And so I think this sound of these drums is even more my sound than what I envisioned my sound being. And every time I've recorded on them, the engineers come in after just doing a sound check and they go, "What are these?" You know, so I'm not doing anything. They sound great, and whatever you're doing, whatever you did, we're not touching anything. We're just leaving it there. You know, and so they're easy to play. They tune beautifully. And Russ Miller, I can't say enough about Russ Miller. I mean, we all know he's a great drummer, but I didn't know his engineering technique. I mean, he's, you know, we went to a NAMM presentation for all the international dealers, and he's got the big screen and he's putting up blueprints. And I'm going, wow, man, these guys in Asia can really do this, man. Look at the find out that blueprint. And Russ, I said, he said, "Those are my blueprints." It's like, is there anything you can't do? You know?
And aside from his mechanical drawing skills, I mean, you know, out of the mind of Russ Miller, and I want everyone to understand that this was concepts and ideas that Russ, you know, researched and understood, and then was able to then, not only did he have these ideas in his own head, but he was able to get Mapex to then realize, let's try some of this. And I mean, to get a company to say, okay, listen, we're not exactly sure where you're going, but we'll go there with you.
Right, that's true.
Came out with the design lamp drums. They are beautiful drums designed in a way that allows each drum to find its own, maximum sound that it can produce. Beautiful, beautiful.
Right. At the NAMM show, I went around and played all the different sets, and it's still me with my stick, you know, and none of the drum sets sounded alike, but I could still get my sound, whether they had clear heads on them or whatever they had on. I could tell the drum was resonating, and it was a hell of a drum to play that I knew I could get something out of, you know, what I was looking for. So, and then the whole snare drum line, you know, all those snare drums I played. You were at the NAMM show, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, how many snare drums they had lined up, and each one had a distinct sound, and they were all fantastic. And I mean, even the piccolo, which I would, you know, I'd never liked piccolo snare drums, but even the piccolo I would take a second look at, you know. And so it's, you know, and I'm thrilled that they're introducing. They offered a signature snare drum for me, so I'm shamelessly, proudly, humbly. Anyway, the new drum's coming out. It's called Maximus, and it's the same sound that I've had for years, and they were able to get that same sound, that warm, round sound out of the Maximus. So I'm excited to have that introduced very quickly. You know.
Yeah, and was that drum used on the album "Catch Me If You Can"? That snare drum.
That is correct. That's the first time I used that drum in the studio. Yeah.
Sounds beautiful. Just describe the snare drum.
Black lacquer to match the rest of the black lacquer drums that I have. And the bearing edges, I don't know if Russ wants all the information out of the different angles and everything of the bearing edge, but the top bearing edge is different than the bottom bearing edge. And one throw off. I don't like too much going on with the snare drum, so it's one strainer with a throw off. It's really pretty basic. You know, it might be the most basic snare drum they make. You know, so but it's got that warmth that I look for in a snare drum. You can tune it up and get the high crack out of it if you want. You can tune it lower, and it sounds like a big with a fiber skin diplomat on it. Sounds like a big old. It's 6x14, so it sounds like a big old, close to Radio King warmth with that big old whop on it, you know. So it's a pretty versatile snare drum, you know. And it's interesting with these drums. I called up Bob Terry. I'd alternate between Russ and Bob, and I said, man, I couldn't get off the mounted tom last night. I mean, it just sounds so beautiful. And with the tom mount that lets it breathe. I said, everything I did started and ended with the mounted tom. I started creating all my solos with it. And then I call Russ the next week. I said, that floor tom, what'd you do to that floor tom? It's like, so, and then I'll have people coming up saying, well, man, the whole set sounds, I didn't have a favorite. The whole set sounds great, but that bass drum hit the back wall without a microphone. I haven't had a mic on the bass drum in 3 years. I think 2 or 3 times. One was at the Hollywood Bowl, where seats 18,000 people, and so you got to have some mics on it for a couple of these things. But for concert halls, 2,500 seat concert halls with a big band, it's 2 overheads.
Well, here's a perfect example. Steve Picataglio heard the drums for the first time at Lincoln Center when you played the Oscar Peterson tribute. All the way in the back, and was blown away by the sound of the drums. Absolutely.
Well, Steve has good taste, doesn't he? He didn't dig the drumming, but the sound was really good.
I'm sure he loved it for sure. I'm sure.
No, I'm joking. Yeah, I know Steve. Good player. I think if you're aware of the balance that you can get out of your drums, you can be your own engineer. I learned that from Jack Guilfoyle, one of the great Indiana drummers. And I took a lesson with him, and he said, what was the loudest thing that you just played? And I said, my snare drum. And he said, right. What was the next loudest? Anyway, it was all wrong.
Yeah.
He said, be your own sound engineer. Start with what should be the loudest thing. And I said, the ride cymbal. He said, yeah, when you're playing time and jazz, yes, the ride cymbal. What should be next? I said, the hi-hat. He said, yes. We just kept going on. So he said, listen, there are enough lousy engineers out there in the world, but if you're your own engineer at the drums, then they have a harder time messing up your sound.
Yeah. That's great advice. That's great advice.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for the compliment.
Really great. So in closing here, Jeff, I mean, my gosh, we
already?
I know this. It goes by so fast. In closing, I want you to think about what would you say to the next generation that has all the accessibility because of the internet that we did not have. Listen, we had to struggle for the knowledge that we had, and we struggled for it, which is probably why we retained it so well, because we had to fight for it. It doesn't seem like they're fighting as hard. So what advice would you give to this next generation on how they can go back to listen to these great people, and who should they research?
Well, first of all, I think you have to listen to music you like. It's people can tell you to go listen to Papa Joe Jones, but if that doesn't do it for you, then you'll get to it later. But listen to music you like. Pick 1 or 2 people you love, transcribe some of the things they do, try to play them exactly. And worry, you're never going to sound like them. It's impossible. Believe me, we've tried, but you're going to have that information in your head. I think one of the issues is that we have so much information that people just kind of go, oh yeah, there's 8 bars of Willie Jones. There's 8 bars of Brian Blades. I want that 4 bars of Lewis Nash. And I think you just become a cut and paste kind of player, and it's so obvious to people who have listened to the music where they sit down and listen. I had a student from Venezuela came to me, and he never had studied with anybody, and I said, play for me. And it was exactly that. It was 8 bars of Jack DeJohnette, 8 bars of Joey Barron, and I thought, wow, this guy's really done his homework, but there's no continuity through this whole thing. I said, who's your teacher? He says, there aren't any drum teachers there. It's all from the internet.
Yeah.
And so I think we get too scattered with our focus and aren't focused on 1 or 2 things. I would just pick Philly Joe still am, we keep going back to it, but I would just listen to Philly Joe for a year and transcribe everything I could and try to get that down. Play along to the records for the groove. Forget playing to a metronome. Play to the records, get your cymbal beat going with the records, and play to your favorite players and how the time feels. And you'll also find out about some of the time of the drummers when you start playing to them, So you'll shift your focus to somebody else that feels a little differently, and you go, I think this is where I'm at. And sing your ride cymbal beat. If you're going to be a jazz drummer, sing your ride cymbal beat and be able to emulate that, because that's what you're hearing inside. Don't just apply your knowledge to the drums. What's your voice, and sing through your instrument. And as I said at the convention, you heard me say this.
Yeah.
I prefer to hear a musician who happens to own a drum set. I'm up to here
Yeah.
with drummers. I want to hear a
Yeah. Yeah.
musician who actually knows how to make music with the instrument.
Yeah. Boy, that's great advice. And that is to a large degree what we're losing. We're getting too focused in the minutia of the instrument and not the bigger picture of what its purpose is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also frustrating to have this much time to check into the Sabian virtual things, and Mark Love and Andy Zildjian are demonstrating. And I'm about every fourth comment is, how do I get an endorsement? And the answer is, play your butt off and people will be attracted to you. Every endorsement I've ever gotten has come to me. I've never approached a company to get an endorsement. And so as long as you're playing your butt off, people are going to be attracted to you, and you're going to work, and the endorsements are probably going to come in because they want you to be a part of that company. But all this, networking, social networking stuff it just is passe after a while. It comes down to, what do you do with this?
Yeah. It almost kind of homogenizes everyone. There's got to be a uniqueness and a value of what you offer. And you have clearly done that. Your sound, the way you play, your musical compositioning of how you approach the instrument always is affected by who you're playing with at that time. And many times that I've heard you play, you always pull off of what's happening at that moment, and you react and adapt at that moment. And that's really an incredible skill that you have. It really is beautiful.
Well, thank you very much, Dom. I fielded a question I never had. I did a Mapex clinic in Cleveland at drums, and what's the name? Steeble drums in Cleveland. And there was a gentleman who was maybe 10 years younger than me, and I was fielding questions, and he said, yeah, I have one. And I said, okay. He says, what percentage of your playing over the years do you think has to do with intuition? And I'd never had that question before, nor had I even thought about it.
Yeah.
And I said, now that I think about it, probably 75 to 80%. In jazz, it's like, what do you do to respond? It's spontaneity, which is what I'm missing from all these virtual concerts. Is I'm not, everybody's in their own separate room, and I'm not getting the interplay from people and spontaneity. So you can't be intuitive because it's all happening in a frame at the same time. So in jazz, it's so crucial to have those elements. So intuition it has a lot to do with that, Dom, and knowing the history of my first night with Oscar Peterson. He knew he could throw any arrangement at me, anything he wanted, and he knew I would know it. And somebody said, weren't you scared? Aren't you humbled by this experience to be on the bandstand? I said, no, I had done so much homework. And I was convinced at that point that I'd done more homework than anyone else, and I at least deserved a shot to sit in that drum chair until he started thinking about somebody else. But I was going to make sure that didn't happen, And I was with Oscar for 5 years. My goals were to play with Oscar Peterson, Ray Brown, Woody Herman, and Count Basie. And you can achieve those goals if you do enough homework and you're serious enough about it and make sacrifices. And it will get to that point, but you got to love what you do. You got to be passionate about it and so focused and dedicated, and don't ever lose the joy from playing that instrument the first time. I say this a lot of times. First time we walk by a piano and reach up and plunk a note on the piano and the big smile comes across our face. That joy has to remain every time you sit at your instrument and play, because, we're given a gift. And so that gift of joy has to come out all the time, every time you play.
Well, I tell you, you are the epitome of that, because each time I've heard you play, I walked out with a higher level of joy that then it became overjoyed. So overjoyed was how I walked out of that place, which was really beautiful. But thank you so much. We're going to have to make this a part 2 for sure.
Okay. All right.
And we're going to have to do it so we can continue more with some more of these stories. And boy, Jeff, thank you so much on behalf of Mapex and this entire experience. All the people that have joined us, thank you so much. There are so many more great questions. We'll try and get to them. If you even check it out later on too, Jeff, you can go back and answer some of those questions too. But people from Greece and South America and Europe, we really kind of grabbed a wide variety of people here. So I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dom. I always enjoy spending time with you, and I promise to have a different shirt for part 2. Okay, so just give me enough time. All right.
I'm gonna hold you to that for sure, man.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.